CSGO. So many memories are tied to this game. Remember coming home and playing for hours on end, following tournaments and rooting for your favorite teams? The game felt different back then, not quite like CS2. By the way, it's already been a year since CS2's release, and 12 years since CSGO launched. Although many still hold the previous version of the game dear, CSGO is now outdated both technically and conceptually, as noted by the developers themselves. One reason for transitioning to the new engine was the flaws in the code, leading to numerous bugs and exploits. Let's take a look back at some of the bugs in CSGO's history. Share in the comments if you are aware of them or not. This video won't really delve too much into exploits that could only be triggered by using cheats, such as double tap, hide shots, and so on, as we've covered that in a previous video. Instead, we'll focus on general issues that could happen to any player at all during a regular match, only occasionally mentioning cheat-related bugs that drastically altered gameplay or made it unbearable. To begin, let's explore moments often seen as features of the game engine, though they are actually bugs. Bunny hopping as an engine bug has been around since the original Quake. Over time, this bug turned into a movement culture cornerstone. There's an important distinction between being on the ground, where friction exists, and being in the air, where there's none. That is why on the ground, if you stop pressing any keys, friction slows you to a halt. In the air, though, until you make contact with something, your speed remains constant. In the game, the player controls two key things: their orientation and the movement keys they press. The movement keys provide acceleration, and the combination of movement keys and player orientation determines the direction in which the player wants to apply that acceleration. Players control their orientation and movement keys, which, when combined with timely jumps and strafing, can produce greater speeds than normal running. There's been a long-standing debate among players over whether bunny hopping is an engine bug or a deliberate gameplay mechanic. In the source engine, players could climb ladders faster by moving diagonally rather than straight up. This required pressing forward, which is W, and one of the sideways movement keys, which are A or D, having turned the camera in the opposite direction of the sideways movement key. The source engine processes ladder movement based on two directions of the velocity of the player: vertical, which is up or down, and horizontal, which is left or right. If you move on the ladder just vertically by pressing forward, the engine changes just the vertical direction of our velocity. However, if you start moving diagonally, meaning up and sideways at the same time, the engine adds the horizontal speed to our vertical speed, giving us a slight overall speed boost. This occurs due to the fact that in the engine, movement in multiple directions simultaneously isn't as limited as if you were to move in only one direction. The edge bug is an engine bug tied to how player velocity is reflected during a fall. This bug occurs when a player lands on the edge of a surface diagonally and immediately slides off within the same tick. The mechanics are as follows. Upon landing, the player first hits the ground and gets their falling speed reset to 0. But then the player's horizontal speed is applied, causing them to end up in midair again. The fall damage check happens at the very end of the tick, sees that you're not on the ground, and thus doesn't apply any damage. That's also why you don't make sound. You never actually get classed as on ground by the movement code. An example of this mechanism would be a situation in which the player collides with the surface at an angle. If the player hits a wall or a corner, their velocity is reflected as if they bounced at a 180-degree angle. In doing so, the horizontal velocity is nullified, thus avoiding damage when falling. Thanks to this reflection, when touching corners or inclined surfaces, as on some ledges, the engine does not count it as a full landing. The player immediately moves to the other side, into the other side, and, due to the sloping surface, their speed is dampened, which helps avoid falling damage. In earlier versions of CSGO, using a flash grenade, you could get propelled way up in the sky. This is a quirk of the source engine's object interaction mechanics. This is sort of similar to how speedruns for Half-Life are made. Similar stuff occurs in other games as well, like rocket flying in Fortnite. Now, let's look at bugs that many players encounter during gameplay. These aren't classic bugs, but rather shortcomings in the game's engine. If you've played CSGO long enough, you've likely experienced aiming right at an opponent, shooting, and missing. The thing is, servers have a tick rate, which is essentially a static FPS. To ensure that players with high FPS don't see the game running at just 64 FPS, the game smooths out many processes by interpolating between the information from the previous tick and the current one. Because of this, sometimes players have to aim ahead to accurately hit a target, predicting the opponent's movement. While players see an interpolated model between the previous and current tick, the hitbox is actually slightly ahead, at the current tick. This issue is worsened by the fact that even if you try to shoot, your actions will only be processed at the next tick, which can usually be up to 16 milliseconds later. Many players do not notice these nuances, though, for most average players, missed shots are generally due to weapon spread. Even with maximum accuracy, weapons are still not perfect at long distances. Moreover, when a player dies on the server, the game won't actually allow them to shoot, even if it seems like they are still alive on their screen and they fired. There are two main problems here. 1. Ping. This is the delay between the computer and the server. Due to ping, it can appear that the player is still alive, but the server has already registered their death, so the shot won't count. 2. Shot processing order. In CSGO, the server processes all players' actions in a random order. If a player is unlucky and their shots are processed last, the shot might not register because the server has already registered their death. By the way, these issues were the main problems of the last version of the game, which were solved in CS2 by introducing a new sub-tick system. Sometimes, technical desynchronization occurs in the game due to connection issues, causing the game to simulate the environment and display information that doesn't match reality. Desync refers to discrepancies between what's happening on screen and what's actually occurring on the server. The main causes include 1. Weapon spread. In CS, bullet spread on the client may differ from what happens on the server. This means the player shoots, but the bullets don't go exactly where aimed because the spread isn't synchronized with the server. In CS2, this problem was fixed. Many players mistakenly think this is an issue with hitboxes, hit registration, but it's not. CS has complex strafing and aiming mechanics, and if a player's counter-strafe reflex, stopping before shooting, isn't well practiced, they may miss often. 2. Hitboxes. Sometimes, hitboxes, hit detection areas on players, may not perfectly align with the character model due to desynchronization. However, this is nearly imperceptible and has minimal impact on the game, especially for fair players. 3. Lag compensation. CSGO didn't have the so-called sub-tick, so if a player's FPS is higher than the server's tick rate, they see extra frames that the server hasn't processed yet. Even if FPS matches the tick rate, there can still be discrepancies due to interpolation, which intentionally delays the image by 1 to 2 ticks depending on settings. This results in players seeing transitional moments that aren't actually happening on the server. In CS2, this was improved, so what's seen on the screen more accurately reflects what's happening on the server. CSGO had various issues with grenades. Let's take a look at some of them. Have you ever had a Molotov thrown at you? Try to extinguish it with a smoke grenade, and it didn't work. This is another bug related to the game engine and the Molotov extinguishing system. Molotovs have hitboxes, boundaries that define their position, and if the smoke grenade touches these hitboxes at the wrong time or height, it may fail to deploy because the game considers the smoke used to extinguish the flames. On some maps, there are spots where grenades could get stuck in textures and fail to bounce as expected. The number of grenades available for purchase is limited. However, in the past, leaving the server would reset the grenade purchase counter, allowing players to buy an unlimited number of grenades. By the way, this vulnerability also let players buy so many weapons and grenades that it could cause the server to crash. Sometimes, smoke grenades would not render correctly, allowing players to see through the smoke using certain effects, like grenade explosions. Over time, grenade explosion effects were refined. For example, in the past, grenade particles would spread so widely after exploding that enemies couldn't be seen, and the smoke could be entirely disabled with certain NVIDIA GeForce driver settings by adjusting color correction. As previously noted, grenades in CSGO had some issues. One of them was incorrect flashbang blindness calculation when interacting with map objects. When a new map or major update was released, developers often couldn't anticipate every possible issue. This led to the following bugs. Sometimes, players could walk through textures, like on Mirage. Players could also fall onto the lift on D-Vertigo without taking damage. On D-Train, it was even possible to jump onto a pigeon and fly above the map with it. It was as easy as to fall under the map as it was to boost and see opponents through textures. On D-Nuke, players could even defuse the bomb through textures. There were dozens of such bugs, and listing them all would take too long. Throwing the bomb into a corner or behind textures was always frustrating for the terrorist team. Valve later added griefing protection, which introduced a new bug where the bomb would teleport to a different spot on the map. Way before the release of CSGO, a bug was found that allowed players to make walls and objects transparent using an Asus driver for their graphics cards, which literally made walls see-through. This vulnerability was later fixed, and Asus walls became known as a cheat feature. On some maps, players could encounter a bug where they could slide along the edges of map objects, allowing them to move slowly or maintain height instead of falling. The game calculates movement physics, but tiny details like object pixels are sometimes processed incorrectly, letting players stay on surfaces where they shouldn't be and navigate strange angles or tiny ledges. A common source engine bug where certain objects on the map were implemented incorrectly, causing players to get stuck while jumping and slowly falling to the ground. When landing, the game considered it a fall from a great height, inflicting critical damage upon impact. A source engine bug where skyboxes were displayed incorrectly or disappeared entirely. This memorable bug occurred on November 29, 2014, when Fnatic played against LDLC in a BO3 series tied 1-1 during DreamHack Winter 2014. The final map was D Overpass, where Fnatic was losing badly, ending the first half at 12-3 and losing the pistol round as CT. However, everything changed with olofmeister's legendary boost, which provided a view of most of the map and enabled a complete comeback. LDLC didn't win another round. Tournament organizers ordered Fnatic to replay the third map, to which they refused and withdrew from the tournament. By the way, eSports also had one more issue. One of the biggest cheating scandals involved coaches. Nearly 50 coaches were banned for using a bug that allowed them to lock onto any point on the map and stay there for the entire game. This bug had existed since the coach slot was added in 2017 and was patched, but later resurfaced. Valve reset the RMR points of teams whose coaches were caught using this exploit during tournaments. Although the bug was fixed, in 2022, new ways to trigger it were discovered, resulting in additional bans. Around 50 people were banned in total, including coaches from teams like Navi, Heroic, NIP, and FaZe. Bugs that can be triggered usually only by using cheats. Several bugs allowed players to instantly plant or defuse the bomb by bypassing the timer, making the game think the actions were already completed. Numerous methods to crash servers existed, mostly involving sending massive amounts of packets that the server couldn't filter and process, causing significant lag and even complete disconnection. Server crashes could also be triggered by simply jumping in specific map locations. In Danger Zone mode, players could perform exojumps to speed up mid-jump. However, abruptly changing the camera angle during a jump allowed players to leap in their desired direction at high speed. Air Stuck was an exploit that allowed players to freeze in mid-air by intercepting functions processing user input and altering data. A similar effect could be achieved without cheats through pixel surf techniques, like crouching during a jump on certain textures, with the most common spot being the entrance to the apartments from T-Spawn. Hackish bugs that could be reproduced without cheats. In CS, deleting or replacing game files to remove textures wasn't originally prevented. Deleting specific texture files allowed players to literally see through walls. This was later fixed with a CRC check to verify file integrity. This exploit even worked on platforms like Faceit. There were multiple variations of teleport exploits. One involved players appearing near the map's origin coordinates after reconnecting to the server, and spamming the console command join team. Another version occurred when players used the reset team command at the end of a round, keeping them in place. It was possible to see enemy silhouettes through the bomb. With the help of AHK scripts, players could activate or draw other models to see player models even when SV cheats was disabled on the server. Using a program to artificially increase ping could create a local lag effect, allowing players to peek around corners to see enemy positions. This also caused a camera bug, where it would display inside textures. Bugs related to the player movement. If a player crouched, then jumped, released the crouch key, and crouched again in midair, they could gain information and spot opponents who couldn't see their jump. Additionally, there was no landing sound. This exploit was fixed after being used during the 2017 Krakow MGL Major. This bug existed in various forms and provided significant advantages when players timed a crouch key press in midair. It increased jump height, allowing players to reach areas that weren't intended to be accessible alone. It also enabled landing from any height without taking damage, and reduced or eliminated the sound of falling. These commands were originally intended for no-clip mode, allowing players to fly up or down. However, players discovered that when used while moving on the ground, these commands reduced movement speed by nearly 19%. This happened because the direction of movement was angled upward. But since there's no up or down when calculating ground movement, the movement direction was simply shortened. In-game, footstep sounds are only emitted when a speed of 135 units per second is reached. Players figured out that with weapons like the AUG and SG-553 while scoped, and the Negev, they could move silently and faster than when walking using the shift key. When the Operation Riptide update added character skins, some models' hitboxes didn't match their appearances, giving players an advantage. Some models also blended into the environment, making it hard to see players in certain positions. Occasionally, when players respawned, their camera would float in the air due to client-server synchronization issues during jumps. The server might transmit incorrect position data, causing the camera to stay in its previous spot or behave erratically. Alternatively, physics or respawn animation processing could cause the camera to lose the player model and move independently. This bug was manually fixed by third-party software developers, while regular players frequently encountered it. Using special symbols to apply color to text, players could fake a chat message indicating an item drop. The method was straightforward. Executing a specific console command related to radio would trick other players into thinking an item had been obtained through a trade or case opening. There was a special character, E202, which could be used to create a group tag, causing a player's nickname to constantly flip, making it difficult to kick them. This glitch was triggered by setting a clan tag with the E202 character. The R8 revolver has two firing modes. The primary attack draws the hammer back before firing, resulting in an accurate shot, and the secondary attack is a quick shot using the fanning technique, resulting in a much faster but far less accurate shot. But by following a set of slightly complicated instructions to reproduce a certain bug, which resulted in 7 bullets, you can shoot both instantly and accurately. The alias command lets you create a pseudo command and assign other commands to it. For example, making the gun fire when the mouse button is released rather than pressed. However, typing alias 1 into the console caused the game to crash. Players could trick others into typing this command, causing their game to crash. The crash occurred because the pseudo command named 1 was assigned to nothing, which the game couldn't process. A rare glitch allowed one team to vote to kick players from the opposing team. This happened randomly, and the root cause was never identified. A certain function sometimes triggered improperly, transferring a player to the opposite team. players could also join the spectator team while being on one of the active teams, again, completely randomly. Throughout CSGO's history, countless bugs and exploits dramatically impacted gameplay, some involving cheats and others occurring naturally. These bugs existed within different time spans. They would appear and disappear with updates, making it hard to keep track of them all. It would be insanely difficult to remember all of the bugs. So let us know in the comments how many of these bugs you are aware of and which ones we may have missed. Feel free to also share topics you'd like to learn about in future videos. Throughout this video, we've hidden several Easter eggs containing subscription activation codes, and we're starting a giveaway for all commenters. The rules are simple. Like the video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a meaningful comment with your neverlose username at the end of it. Thank you for watching. This has been the neverlose team. Stay tuned for more insights in our upcoming videos.